Hello everyone, Just Podcast TV is here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified on new
Episode
content.
89, A Heavenly Harvest. Ding! Congratulations to the host for checking in to the location. You have received a special set of equipment. The reward is hidden at the peak of the highest mountain on this island. Next check-in location, the mountain peak. The system notification that jolted through his mind caused James's eyes to gape open. Oh my God, so this is the nameless island that the system had rewarded me with. Surely this can't be a mere coincidence. At this point, he was far too astonished by the turn of events to pay any attention to the reward the system mentioned. He was also overwhelmed by hunger to the point of nausea. Carrying the unconscious Vanessa on his back, he arrived at the bottom of a stand of coconut trees. He placed her gently on the beach and began studying the coconuts hanging high up in a cluster. The coconuts were the one thing that could save their lives right now. Not only would the juice relieve their dehydration, it also contained a healthy dose of glucose and vitamins that could replenish the nutrients they so desperately needed. Moreover, the layer of smooth white meat within the fresh coconut contained protein and just plain substance that could satiate their hunger. But they had a problem. The coconut trees were all close to 30 feet tall, and there was no place for him to hold on to the bare trunks. With his sapped strength, he could simply not climb them. What should we do now? He muttered as he walked around the trees. Katie and Krista arrived. They sat down on the sandy beach and looked at the coconuts high up in the trees with longing expressions. At this point, they were on the verge of losing their minds with hunger. Then, James locked his gaze on the AK-47 strapped to Katie's back. An idea lit up his mind and he said urgently, "Katie, pass the rifle to me." He took the gun, unlatched the safety, chambered around, and aimed at the top of the nearest coconut tree. With the day approaching noon, however, the radiating sunlight shined directly in his eyes. Furthermore, the nausea caused by his hunger made him lose focus. Even his master marksmanship skill could not help him concentrate on his aim. Bang! James fired, but the bullet missed its mark entirely. Seeing his anxious expression, Krista offered encouragement. "Sir, take your time. Be sure to adjust your breathing and calm your mind before taking another shot." James instantly realized his mistake. Krista was indeed correct. The more desperate you wanted something, the less likely you'll actually attain it. Lowering the gun and closing his eyes, he took a few deep breaths and forced all distracting thoughts from his mind. Only after regaining his composure did he take aim again. Bang! This time, the bullet pierced through the branches attached to the coconuts. Crack! The branches were instantly split apart by the bullet. In the next instant, 4 coconuts dropped onto the beach. Since the sand below was so soft, it served as a cushion to break their fall. James immediately placed the gun down and retrieved the welcome bounty. Since he possessed the survival skills of Bear Grylls, chopping open the coconuts with the axe to extract the juices and meat within was a simple matter. He skillfully prepped 2 of the coconuts and handed them over to Katie and Krista, who were barely able to endure their thirst any longer. They quickly gulped the nutritious juice without a care. They were far too thirsty to think about anything else. Although James was equally tormented by thirst, he still had to prioritize Vanessa. "Vanessa," he said softly, "here, have some coconut juice." Judging from her pale face and limp body, Vanessa appeared to have fallen into mild shock. No matter how much he shook her, she simply would not wake up. Without any other choices, James sucked the coconut juice into his mouth and fed it to Vanessa like a bird feeding its young. Her exhausted body's instincts kicked in, and she was able to swallow the life-saving liquid even though she was barely conscious. Only after doing all of this did James finally split open the remaining coconut and drink it. The sweet juice flowing down his dried throat felt like rainwater soaking into the cracked earth after a long drought. As the juice reached his stomach, he could feel his organs gratefully absorbing what they so desperately needed. Having quenched his thirst and replenished the nutrients in his body, James quickly recovered some of his spirit and strength. The three women, on the other hand, were still quite weak. Even though they too had drunk the coconut juice, they simply could not recover all their lost energy in such a short period of time. They just lay there in the shade of the trees at the edge of the beach, doing their best to escape the relentless glare of the noontime sun. Still in deep slumber, Vanessa remained the weakest among them. Her thirst and nutrition needs had been partially satiated, and color was gradually returning to her face. But she needed more time to regain full consciousness. James picked her up from the beach and placed her under the shade of the trees where Krista and Katie were resting. Their lifeboat had been equipped with a sunshade to protect them from the relentless sun at sea. Now they had to be cognizant of sunburn out in the open of this tropical island. With the others resting under the trees, James gathered the leftover coconut shells. They could not afford to waste them. The inner part was covered in a layer of meat. Now that they were in dire need of food, they certainly could not throw such a precious resource away. James once again used the axe to chop the hard coconut shells in half before tearing out some of the white flesh inside. Although the flesh of these particular coconuts was neither tender nor smooth and only held a faint hint of fragrance, it was still food that could save their lives right now. He passed 2 coconuts to Krista and Katie. Although the meat carried the slight taste of wood, the 3 of them happily filled their empty stomachs with this great gift from the gods. After devouring as much flesh as they could extract from the coconut shells, they all started feeling drowsy. Under the comfortable shade of the trees, they quickly fell asleep. By the time James woke up, it was already late in the afternoon. Seeing the women still sleeping soundly and Vanessa's face gradually gaining back its rosy color, he felt much more relaxed. He stood up. He could tell that his energy had been partially replenished by the food and rest. I need to think of a way to harvest more coconuts while it's still daytime, he thought. When the others woke up, they would definitely need to replenish their water and nutrition again. This was especially true for Vanessa. Looking at her condition, James reckoned they would definitely not be able to leave the beach and explore the rest of the island today. After all, they didn't know what unknown dangers lurked out there. He could not possibly lead the women into the forest and risk their lives, especially after dark. Even so, they would eventually need to explore the island to find a reliable source of fresh water. Although they had the coconut juice to quench their thirst for now, it was far from enough to fully satiate them. Besides, they were now stranded on this deserted island. What they lacked the least was time. They could venture out tomorrow. James looked up at the next coconut tree. Now that he had recovered some of his strength, he was prepared to climb up and pluck the coconuts with his bare hands. Shooting them down was out of the question. They had to conserve their ammunition. There were only 23 rounds left in the AK, and it was their only effective weapon other than the axe. His strength replenished, James quickly climbed up the tree and plucked more coconuts off the branches, sending them falling to the soft sand below. He didn't harvest every single one, but instead left a few hanging on the tree. He had to consider their future, as this would most likely be a long battle of attrition. Just as he was shimmying back down the tree, Katie's anxious voice suddenly rang out beneath him. "James! James! Come quickly!" Episode 90, Clambake. James's heart skipped a beat upon hearing Katie's urgent cry. He looked down from the tree in alarm, his heart beating wildly. But in the next second, she waved her hand at him and said, "Vanessa is awake." Taking a closer look at their spot in the shade, he could see that Vanessa was now sitting up. Krista was sitting next to her, holding her hand. James hurried down the tree and rushed over to where they were sitting. "Vanessa, how are you feeling?" he asked. "Are you in pain? Do you feel uncomfortable?" He was especially worried that, after going through such a terrible ordeal in the thunderstorm last night, and being exposed to the glaring sun today, Her natural immune system would be weakened and she could fall ill. They did not have any medical supplies or hot water. If she did get sick, it would be a disaster. After a moment of silence, Vanessa swept her gaze across all of them and uttered only 2 words. "I'm starving." They burst into laughter. It was a tremendous relief. James quickly fetched a few coconuts and distributed them among the women, then took one for himself. As the sun set in the west, the beach slowly turned cooler. Their clothes were still damp from the ocean, and even in the temperate tropics, they could feel a slight chill. In order to warm up with the last bit of sun, the women devoured the flesh of their coconuts and walked to the beach. Then they stripped off all their clothes and they lay on the sand to dry off. Once they felt sufficiently comfortable, they waded into the mild ocean to wash away the stains on their bodies. To avoid any awkwardness, James had no choice but to miss out on the beautiful scenery. Instead, he headed into the forest to gather some dry branches and leaves to prepare for the night. Although the temperature on the beach was frighteningly high during the day, it would drop quite a bit at night when the breeze blew in from the sea. Since the women had only thin clothing, he would need to start a fire to keep them warm. James's clothes had been shredded the night before, so he'd need the warmth as well. The lush greenery he pushed his way through possessed all the characteristics of a tropical rainforest. Hot and humid, it gave off a rotten smell. There were various kinds of trees and broadleaf plants, but it still wasn't easy for him to find dry branches enough for a campfire. James returned to the beach just after sunset with enough material to make a fire. The 3 beauties had already finished cleaning themselves and had put on their clothes. As he put down the bundle of branches, he saw Vanessa waving at him from not too far away. "James," she cried, "come and see what we've caught." It seemed that they had discovered some sort of treasure. As soon as he arrived, he saw what they had found. A large pile of clams lying in a pit on the beach. They were around the size of a baby's fist. Each of them must have been carrying quite a lot of meat. James counted a total of 35. Not only were clams rich in nutrients, they also contained the necessary amount of sodium to replenish what they were now lacking in their bodies. He was surprised by this unlooked-for bounty. "Clams? Where did you find so many of them?" "Oh, we dug them out from under the sand in the shallows," Vanessa explained. "After we finished washing up, Krista said we should try our luck at catching something to eat in the sea. But none of us thought we would come across such a big harvest." James burst out laughing. "A great harvest indeed. Let's go, ladies. Tonight's menu, grilled clams." Once again, he truly felt that Krista was his lucky star. She was full of unexpected surprises. James turned and headed towards the rocks along the shoreline. "Krista," he called out, "take the clams to the water and wash away the sand. We'll be having a seafood meal tonight." As the day slowly turned to dusk, James returned with 3 thin slabs of stone and set them aside. Soon, he had a bonfire blazing on the beach. Fashioning the slabs into a simple oven, James split open the clams with the axe and placed them on the makeshift grill one by one. It was yet another survival skill he now knew thanks to his earlier special reward. His grilling method worked beautifully. Not only did it prevent the smell of smoke from infesting the clams, it also allowed them to eat properly cooked food. Soon the stone started smoking with heat from the flames produced by the dry branches below. The heat forced the clams to split open, and they sizzled with oil as their rich fragrance filled the air. Using 2 thin branches as chopsticks, James divided the grilled clams among them. He picked the meat out of a shell and placed it into his mouth. Its tender, greasy texture hit his taste buds like a tidal wave. Chewing slowly and swallowing the food mindfully, waves of warmth spread throughout his entire body. He felt as if he had entered heaven. Stranded on such a harsh island, it was truly a blessing for them to dine on such good food. After finishing her meal, Vanessa rubbed her stomach and said with a satisfied expression, "That was incredible." Katie glanced over and teased her. "Of course you feel good. You ate the most out of all of us. Aren't you afraid James will lose interest in you after you get fat?" Vanessa rolled her eyes and shot back playfully, You didn't eat very much. Do you think James is attracted to the starving castaway look? Off to the side, Krista wiped the grease from the corner of her mouth and listened to the other girls' mock bickering. As the big sister of their group, she could not help but smile. James also laughed but did not speak. He just surrendered himself to the joy of this moment. According to their playful words, it seemed that the three of them had tacitly agreed to share him. He looked over at Vanessa. When we were still in New York, you once asked me what happiness truly is. So do you finally understand? Yes, she replied without hesitation. I finally do understand. To me, happiness is being able to eat. Everything else is irrelevant. Everyone burst into laughter. At the bonfire that night, their cheerful laughter reverberated across the island. It was as if they had returned to the Maldives and were hanging out on the beach in front of the big villa on Coney Island. As the evening progressed, the women began worrying about James. Since his clothes were in tatters, they were concerned he might freeze to death. As such, they agreed to lie around him and use their combined body temperature to keep him warm. James had read novels about people being stranded on a deserted island. In those stories, the characters would often resort to their most sinister impulses to obtain their share of the limited food and water. But now that he was, in real life, stranded on a deserted island with three beautiful women, he could confirm that those plot twists were the product of the author's feverish imagination. At this moment, he was surrounded by an endless sense of warmth and kindness. The group awoke with the blazing sun. James stood up first and prepared coconuts for everyone. Today's weather looks good, he said. We'll take advantage of it to explore the island. In order to make the best use of their time and find a better place to take shelter before sunset, they needed to set out as soon as possible. After their simple breakfast, they packed up their meager belongings and entered the dense tropical forest from the edge of the beach, marking their first day exploring the deeper parts of the island. Episode 91, The Birds. Although the sun had already risen high in the sky, it appeared quite dim from within the depths of the forest. Whatever sunlight penetrated through the dense foliage looked like golden pillars of light shining down from the heavens. Bundles of vines intertwined and wound back and forth between the trees like huge net-shaped cages. The trunks of the ancient banyan trees were covered with green lichen and moss, giving the forest a wild, primeval feel. Leading the way, James stepped over and through the withered vegetation that had accumulated over the years. The damp air and smell of animal excrement added to the sense of gloom. They came across split-leaf philodendrons, palm trees, banyan trees, camphor trees, and dozens of other varieties. The assortment of strange plants was like straight out of a book about the ancient past. But they were not in the mood to appreciate the scenery. This was not only a paradise for plants, but also for animals. Besides all kinds of bright feathered birds, there were also all kinds of poisonous insects and snakes, and dangerous carnivores lurking within. They had to be extremely careful with every step they took. Otherwise, they could be bitten by some kind of poisonous creature that camouflaged itself amid the brush. With no access to medical care, it would be an agonizing death. Fortunately, James possessed the survival skills of Bear Grylls. He could identify and avoid all kinds of dangers in advance and lead the group through the forest safely. Up in front with the axe, James hacked at the plants and vines that obstructed their path. In his left hand was a long, sturdy stick to drive away poisonous insects and snakes underfoot. Following close behind, Vanessa carried the bundle of nylon rope on her back. When she got tired, she would hand it to Katie behind her. Krista, carrying the AK-47, took up the rear. They each had an assigned field of view to monitor for threats. James and Krista were in charge of guarding the front and the back, while Katie and Vanessa kept watch to the left and to the right. After about a half an hour, Katie suddenly let out a scream. They all jumped. James looked back anxiously. "What's wrong?" he asked, dropping his walking stick to the ground and holding the axe ready. Katie pointed to the left with a pale face. "There's a snake over there." They couldn't see it at first, camouflaged as it was amid the foliage. But then they noticed the movement. On a thick vine hanging from a tree, A giant green snake as thick as an adult's arm slithered toward the ground. Seemingly aware of them, the snake froze. It flicked its tongue out, alert for danger, ready to attack at any moment. James was more astonished than scared. "Now that's a big snake," he said. The women were less enamored with the reptile. They scattered in all directions. Krista took up position behind a banyan tree and prepared to shoot it with the AK. She had been a brave girl ever since she was a child, but the one thing she was deathly afraid of was snakes. "Everyone stay still," James called out. "It won't bother you if you don't move." He slowly reached down and picked up his stick. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the snake flying into the undergrowth. More frightened than they were, the big snake quickly slithered away. "It's gone," James said, then turned to Katie. "Try not to scream next time. If we come across a tiger or wild boar instead, your screaming could have gotten us all killed." Katie nodded seriously, knowing James was not joking. "I understand," she said. Next, he turned to Krista. "Were you going to shoot that snake? You must remember that there are only 23 rounds left in the magazine. We can't waste any of them unnecessarily." "Yes, sir," she said. "I will remember that." She seemed to be blaming herself for nearly using the gun carelessly, judging by the tone of her response. James noticed and consoled her. "Don't be hard on yourself. You didn't pull the trigger. That's the important part. It's just a reminder." Krista's eyes flashed with determination as she gripped the rifle and said in a firm tone, "You can rest assured I will not waste our ammunition." Her ability to bounce back reassured James that he could leave the back of the group to her. As it approached noon, they had already been walking through the forest for about 4 hours, and they were only around 3 miles away from where they'd started. Along the way, James used the long wooden stick to push away the many poisonous snakes and insects that blocked their path. It slowed their advance considerably. The grilled clams the night before had fully nourished their bodies, allowing them to travel through the dense tropical forest for such a long time. However, James did not want to exhaust too much of their energy. He had observed some of the island's terrain from the rocks by the beach and knew generally where the mountain might be located. Although he could not see the entire slope, he figured they had already walked half the distance to it according to his memory. After a while, they came upon a large limestone boulder that was a perfect location for a rest break. James took the coconut Katie had been carrying and distributed the meat and juice to the group. After resting for about 10 minutes, he stood up to continue their journey. A bird, apparently startled by his movement, suddenly burst out from an unusually luxuriant banyan tree to the left of the boulder. It was followed immediately by a large flock of the same kind of bird. As the birds spread out their colorful wings, they kept circling overhead. It seemed as if a vivid cloud had suddenly appeared above their heads. James could not help but shout in delight. "Those are macaws!" The women also took in the beautiful sight. They had seen this species of bird in the zoo before, but they had never seen so many of them at once, and certainly not in the wild. Then James realized something. "Wait a minute," he said. "Aren't macaws usually found in the tropical rainforest of the Americas? Why are there so many of them here?" This indeed was a tropical island, but they were quite far away from the Americas. As James became more disturbed by this unusual development, he suddenly noticed a huge black shadow in the middle of the banyan tree from where the birds had emerged. His hair stood up on end. Episode 92, Hunter Tales. James focused his eyes and saw the shadow before him clearly. It was a black bear, a big one. He was speechless. He wanted to curse his own fat mouth. He had just told Katie what not to do if a large carnivore really appeared. He hadn't expected one to actually show up. Standing closest to him, Vanessa noticed the bear on the branch of the banyan tree right after he did. She lowered her voice and asked, "What should we do?" Not daring to move his head, James warned everyone with a soft voice, "Don't move, not even a single inch. All of you, don't make a sound." Back in his hometown in the Appalachian Mountains, the old hunters claimed that bears did not have good eyesight. They called them blind bears. As long as they didn't move, they should be safe. Even so, running into a bear is not a simple matter. Despite its poor eyesight, its hearing and sense of smell are still incredibly sensitive. If targeted by a full-grown bear, it would be very difficult to escape. By this time, Katie and Krista had finally noticed the large bear and instantly felt their legs go numb. They did not dare move an inch or make a single sound. They just sat on the limestone boulder, still as statues. Although they were more than 20 yards from the bear, they did not assume that it had yet to notice their presence. Roar! In the next moment, the black bear stood up on the branch of the banyan tree as it looked towards James and let out a terrifying roar. When it jumped down, the impact shook the ground and caused the withered leaves under the tree to scatter in all directions. James instantly knew what the bear was doing. It was training itself. This was something else he had heard from the old hunters back in the Blue Ridge. In order to toughen the skin on its back and chest, adult black bears would purposely leap down from trees onto their chests and backs. This behavior was known as self-training. But Vanessa was not from the Blue Ridge Mountains and had never heard of self-training. She thought the bear was about to charge them. She instinctively screamed in fear and prepared to dash away. James was just about to warn everyone not to move because the bear was not charging them, but it was too late. Now the bear was definitely aware of them. "The three of you," James said, "stay here and don't move." He jumped down from the boulder with the axe in his hand. Instead of running away, he immediately charged at the approaching black bear. Seeing his reckless action, the three women cried out nearly at the same time. "James, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Sir, please come back. It's dangerous." James ignored them. Instead, he taunted the bear in a sing-song voice. "Hey, Mr. Blind Bear, your buddy James has arrived." Stopping just short of the beast, he swung the bright axe in his hand. He had also heard from the old hunters that bears despised it when people called them blind bears. He knew that part was nonsense, but he couldn't help himself. His plan was to anger the bear and draw it away from the boulder where the women were hiding. Roar! Sure enough, the bear stood up on its hind legs and glared at James. Beating its chest with its huge paws, it let out another heart-stopping roar. It was completely enraged. Suddenly, the bear curled up its body. In the next second, it pounced towards James like an oncoming train. The petrified women watched from the limestone boulder, their hearts in their throats. Things began happening in slow motion. Krista raised the AK-47 and aimed the muzzle at the bear. Thinking that this qualified as a critical moment, she figured she would be justified if she pulled the trigger. However, even in the face of the fierce attack, James grinned. Although the black bear's rush was astonishing in its power, James' shocking reaction was even more impressive. He jumped diagonally to the right and landed 10 feet away in a flash. Right next to him was a green vine hanging down from a tree. It looked exceptionally tough and sturdy. James grabbed it firmly with his left hand. In his right hand, he still held the axe. The instant the bear got close to him, James swung the axe with all his might. Shriek! As the cutting edge of the blade sliced through the side of the bear, the shiny black fur on its waist immediately split apart. Then, James used the vine to swing away onto a thick branch of a nearby tree. The entire agile sequence was done in one smooth motion. He was like a monkey in the jungle swinging around in its natural habitat. Witnessing this incredible sight, the women were completely stunned. They could not believe what just happened. Crash! The black bear's huge body smashed heavily onto the forest floor, once again scattering leaves in all directions. But the beast had a surprise of its own. Quick as lightning, it lashed out with its paw. Instead of connecting with James, it slammed the trunk of an old tree next to the one he was in. The immense force of the strike left a deep imprint in the tree as bark and splinters flew in all directions. James was amazed by the close call. If he were struck by that paw, he would have been killed. Just then he felt pain in his right hand and opened his palm to investigate. His entire hand had turned numb from the impact of his axe strike. Looking carefully, he realized that the axe had only cut off a piece of the bear's pelt. It did not penetrate to the vital organs beneath. This proved yet another tale the old hunters in town used to tell him. The armor-like skin of the black bear was so strong that even bullets often could not pierce it. As James's mind spun rapidly, he warned Krista, still sitting on the limestone boulder in the distance. "Don't try to shoot it. The skin is too tough." He figured that she would definitely look for an opportunity to shoot now that she saw him in danger. He was worried that her shot might miss a vital spot and draw the bear's attention toward them instead. If that happened, it would be difficult for him to rush back to save them. Roar! Meanwhile, the big guy was going berserk. Without any hesitation, the bear charged towards the tree where James was perched. Judging from its flaming eyes, it did not intend to stop until it killed him.